I still remember the look on Karen's face when she realized that all of the HOA's backdoor deals had been exposed to the entire county board. It was the moment $2.5 million evaporated from their pockets and my ranch gate swung open once again. But wait, the story doesn't end there. When a group of HOA officials decided to block access to my 50-acre ranch that I owned, long before they even existed, they picked the wrong person to mess with. Where are you watching this video from? Drop a comment below and let me know if you've ever had to deal with an HOA. Trust me, this story will make you feel very satisfied. This is how I turned a seemingly helpless situation into the sweetest victory of my life. For 3 generations, the Reynolds family, my family, has owned the same 50 acres of rolling Texas countryside. My grandfather purchased this land back in 1943, working himself to the bone to afford it. My father expanded the original farmhouse into the ranch home we have today, and when he passed, he left it to me with one simple instruction. Take care of this land, Jack. It's more than dirt and grass, it's our history. I took those words to heart. Though I made my living as a software engineer, I always knew this ranch was where I'd retire. Last year, at 50, I finally did just that, moving back full-time with my wife Marissa, a corporate attorney with a mind sharp as a tack and a backbone to match. The ranch isn't just land to us, it's a legacy, a piece of my family's soul embedded in the Texas soil. The trouble started about 8 months ago. For decades, the only access to our property was via a private road that cuts through what used to be Old Man Peterson's farm. He was a good neighbor, kept to himself mostly, and we had a formal easement agreement that was filed with the county when my grandfather first bought our place. 5 years ago, Peterson's children sold the farm to Wildflower Development Corporation, who promptly subdivided it into Oak Ridge Estates, an upscale community of 35 custom-built homes ranging from $750,000 to over $1 million. I wasn't thrilled about having neighbors after years of privacy, but I figured live and let live. The easement was recorded in the property deed, and my right to access my own land was legally protected. At least, that's what I thought. At first, things were quiet. The homes were built, and people started moving in. They seemed nice enough when I'd wave while driving through, mostly wealthy professionals, retirees, and a few families with older kids. Then came the letters. The first one was politely worded but clear in its intent. Dear Mr. Reynolds, the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association would like to respectfully request that you consider using a vehicle more in keeping with our community standards when traveling through our neighborhood. Your pickup truck with farm equipment creates an unwelcome aesthetic disruption for our residents. I laughed and tossed it in the trash. This is Texas, for God's sake. If a pickup truck offends your sensibilities, you're in the wrong state. More letters followed, each more insistent than the last. Then came the phone calls. That's when I met Karen Miller, the HOA president, for the first time. Mr. Reynolds, she said in that fake sweet voice that made my skin crawl, we understand you have an easement, but surely we can come to some arrangement about the appearance of your vehicle and the times you choose to use our roads. I politely reminded her that it wasn't their road, it was a private access road over which I had a legal right of way. She didn't like that answer much. Well, she said, her voice suddenly brittle, we'll just have to see about that, won't we? 3 days later, I received a certified letter informing me that the Oak Ridge Estates HOA had voted to install a security gate with a guard station at the entrance to the community. The letter stated that, for security purposes, only residents and approved guests would be allowed access. There was no mention of my easement rights. When I called Karen to discuss it, she was almost gleeful. The vote was unanimous, Mr. Reynolds. The gate goes up next Tuesday. If you have a problem with that, I suggest you speak to our attorney. When I mentioned my legal easement, she just laughed. Sue us if you want, but these things take time, don't they? In the meantime, I suppose you'll need to find another way to access your farm? I hung up the phone, my hands shaking with anger. Marissa found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at that damned letter. What's wrong? She asked. I handed her the paper and watched as she read it, her expression changing from concern to outrage. They can't do this, she said firmly. Your easement is ironclad. I nodded, but we both knew the reality. Legal battles take time, often months or years. In the meantime, how would we access our home? How would I get feed for the horses? Marissa looked at me with that expression I'd only seen when she was preparing to demolish an opposing counsel in court. Honey, if they want a war, she said, sliding her phone from her pocket and starting to dial, then we'll give them one they'll never forget. The more we dug into the Oak Ridge Estates HOA, the more it became clear this wasn't your typical neighborhood association squabble. This was something more calculated, more insidious, Marissa, God bless her legal mind, started by researching every member of the HOA board. Karen Miller, the president, wasn't just some bored suburban housewife on a power trip. She was a former real estate agent who had actually worked for Wildflower Development Corporation, the very company that built Oak Ridge Estates. Why would a real estate agent who sold these properties suddenly become HOA president? Marissa wondered aloud one evening as we sat on our porch. Usually they make their commission and move on to the next development. It was our first red flag, but far from the last. Richard Hawkins, the vice president, was a local businessman who owned several commercial properties around the county. Stephanie Green, the treasurer, was a certified accountant who worked at a small local firm and seemed, from our limited interactions, to be the only reasonable one in the bunch. We needed to understand what we were up against, so we did what any sensible people would do. We reached out to our old friend Tom Walker, who lived on the 10 acres adjacent to our property. Tom had been in this area for almost 75 years and knew every piece of gossip and backroom deal that went down in the county. "Oh, you haven't heard?" Tom said, chuckling as we sat at his kitchen table drinking coffee. "There's talk of a big shopping center going in just south of the highway exit. If it happens, property values in that whole corridor will double overnight, but they need county approval, and the board's been dragging their feet." Tom's information sent us in a new direction. With a little digging, we found that the proposed shopping center would be built by Meridian Partners, a development company where Richard Hawkins happened to be a silent investor. The pieces were starting to fit together. A shopping center nearby would dramatically increase the value of the Oak Ridge Estates properties, but only if the rural character of the area could be upgraded. It seemed our ranch, with its working animals and farm equipment, was considered an eyesore that might jeopardize the development plans. But we needed more evidence, more concrete information about what exactly was happening. "We need to get inside one of their HOA meetings," Marissa said, her strategic mind working overtime. "We need to hear what they're saying when they think no one's listening." Getting into the HOA meeting wasn't as difficult as we thought it would be. Though they were technically closed to non-residents, the meetings were held in the Oak Ridge Estates clubhouse, which had surprisingly poor security. We dressed in business casual, walked in confidently like we belonged there, and took seats at the back of the room. No one questioned us. Not at first, anyway. The meeting proceeded as most HOA meetings do, with discussions about lawn height regulations and approval processes for exterior paint colors. But then Karen moved to the final agenda item: Community Enhancement Fund allocation. Richard Hawkins took the floor. "As you all know, we've been collecting additional dues for our Special Projects Fund. I'm pleased to report we now have over $250,000 set aside, and Karen and I have been making excellent progress in our public relations efforts with key county officials." The language was carefully vague, but the implication was clear. They were using HOA funds to influence county officials, likely regarding the shopping center development. Stephanie Green, the treasurer, looked distinctly uncomfortable as she presented the financial report, rushing through the details of these public relations expenses. It was only after the meeting adjourned and people began to mingle that our presence was questioned. A woman approached us with a too bright smile. "I don't believe we've met. Are you new residents?" Before I could formulate a convincing lie, Karen spotted us from across the room. Her eyes narrowed and she marched over with Richard in tow. "Mr. Reynolds," she said coldly, "this is a private meeting for residents only. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave." We left without argument, but the damage was done. We'd been made. In the car on the way home, Marissa was quiet, processing what we'd heard. "Jack," she finally said, "I think they're bribing county officials to fast-track that shopping center approval. And I think they see your ranch as the last obstacle to creating their perfect upscale community image." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, staring at the road ahead. "So they're not just trying to block our access," I said, the realization dawning on me. "They're trying to force us to sell the ranch entirely." As we pulled into our driveway using what might be one of our last trips on our legal easement road, I made a silent promise to my father and grandfather. "This land isn't for sale," I muttered. "Not now, not ever." Tuesday came, and with it the gate. True to their word, the HOA had installed an imposing electronic gate with a guard shack manned 24/7 by a security company. When I drove up that morning, ready to head into town for supplies, I was stopped by a guard who looked like he took his job far too seriously. "Resident or visitor?" he asked, clipboard in hand. "Neither," I replied. "I have a legal easement through this property. My ranch is on the other side." The guard looked confused for a moment, then shook his head. "Not on my list, sir. I can only allow residents and approved guests." I showed him the easement paperwork I'd brought along, anticipating this very situation. He glanced at it and shrugged. You'll need to talk to the HOA about that. I just follow the list they gave me. After 15 minutes of arguing, I was forced to back up, turn around, and park my truck on the county road. I had to walk 3 miles around the property line, cross a creek, and climb through my own back fence just to get home. This was untenable. We couldn't live like this. Marissa immediately contacted the county sheriff's office, but as we feared, they considered it a civil matter. Unless there's a court order they're violating, there's not much we can do, the deputy explained. I called my old friend Mike Johnson, who had been a deputy for nearly 20 years. "Jack, I'm sorry," he said, genuine regret in his voice. "I'd help if I could, but my hands are tied. This is going to have to go through the courts." Marissa was already on it, preparing to file for an emergency injunction, but we both knew the wheels of justice turned slowly. It could be weeks or months before we got a ruling, and in the meantime, we were essentially cut off from our own property. Our luck changed when our daughter Emily came home for a visit. A senior computer science major at UT Austin, Emily had inherited her mother's sharp mind and her father's stubborn determination. When she heard about our situation, she was furious. "This is straight up illegal," she fumed. "They can't just trap you on your own property." It was Emily who suggested a more aggressive approach to gathering information. "Mom, Dad, I know you want to do this the right way, through the courts," she said, her expression serious. "But these people are playing dirty. Maybe we need to level the playing field." Her idea was bold, possibly skirting some ethical and legal boundaries, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Using her technical skills, Emily set up a system to monitor the HOA's email communications and financial transactions. All through perfectly legal means, she assured us, though I had my doubts. The breakthrough came not from Emily's digital sleuthing, however, but from an unexpected ally. I was at the local hardware store, buying some fencing supplies I'd have to haul by hand across our property, when a woman approached me. "Mr. Reynolds?" she asked quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I'm Jessica Winters. I live in Oak Ridge Estates." I recognized her immediately. She'd been at the HOA meeting, one of the few who'd looked uncomfortable during the Community Enhancement Fund discussion. "I saw what they did with the gate," she continued. "It's not right, and a lot of us in the neighborhood feel the same way. But Karen has a way of making things difficult for people who speak up." Jessica explained that she was a freelance writer who worked from home, and Karen had already cited her twice for minor HOA violations after she'd questioned some of the board's decisions. "There's something else you should know," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "They're using a shell company for the accounting. Stephanie is really uncomfortable with it, but she's afraid of Karen. The company is called Oak Ridge Community Consulting, but it's just a post office box. I think that's where the money for the county officials is going through." That evening, we held a family council around our kitchen table, Marissa, Emily, and me. With Jessica's information as a starting point, Emily had managed to locate the financial records of Oak Ridge Community Consulting. "It's definitely a shell," she confirmed, turning her laptop so we could see the screen. "There's no actual business activity, just money moving in from the HOA accounts and then out to various individuals, most of them paid as consultants." Marissa leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "Those names? Frank Wilson is a county commissioner, so is Diane Lewis. And that one? Robert Taylor? He's on the planning board." She sat back, a grim smile on her face. "We've got them. This is textbook corruption." Emily's fingers flew across the keyboard. "I've found emails too," she said excitedly. "Karen to Frank Wilson, looking forward to discussing the community enhancement project with you over dinner Saturday. The usual arrangement for consultation fees will apply." And here's one to Richard. "Once we solve the ranch problem, property values will increase by at least 20%. I have 3 commissioners in my pocket, and will soon have 2 more. The evidence was mounting, painting a clear picture of corruption and bribery aimed at fast-tracking the shopping center approval and forcing us off our land. "We need to be careful how we use this," Marissa cautioned. "If we expose them too soon, they'll just circle the wagons and destroy evidence. We need a comprehensive plan." As the night wore on, we developed a 3-pronged strategy. Gather more concrete evidence of the bribes and corruption, find allies within both the HOA and county government who might be willing to help, and prepare a legal and media option if all else failed. Emily's eyes gleamed with determination as she outlined how she could securely store all the evidence we collected. "They'll never be able to delete it or claim it was fabricated," she promised, "and I'll set up anonymous email accounts for communication." I looked at my wife and daughter, feeling a surge of pride. The HOA had picked a fight with the wrong family. They thought they were dealing with a simple rancher they could bully into submission. They had no idea what was coming. 2 weeks into our forced isolation, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Jack Reynolds, this is David Miller, Karen's husband. I think we got off on the wrong foot here." His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man used to closing deals and charming people into getting what he wanted. Apparently, David was a corporate attorney, which explained a lot about the HOA's aggressive legal posturing. "I understand this situation with the gate has been inconvenient for you," he continued, as if blocking access to my home was merely a minor annoyance rather than a violation of my legal rights. "I think I have a solution that could work for everyone involved." I listened, knowing what was coming. "The HOA would like to make an offer on your property. We're prepared to be quite generous. $1.2 million for the entire 50 acres. You could buy a nice place closer to town, something more convenient." I almost laughed out loud. The property was worth at least twice that in the current market, especially with the potential development nearby. "Not interested," I said flatly. "The ranch isn't for sale at any price." There was a pause, and when David spoke again, his tone had shifted from friendly to menacing. "Jack, I don't think you understand the situation. The county is taking a close look at properties in your area for potential environmental and tax compliance issues. It would be a shame if they found problems that required significant fines or remediation." The threat was thinly veiled, but unmistakable. "Are you threatening me, David?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the anger bubbling up inside me. "Not at all," he replied smoothly. "Just sharing some information you might find relevant to your decision-making process. The offer stands for 1 week. After that, well, things might get more complicated." Marissa came home from a meeting with our attorney looking troubled. "They've filed a complaint with the county planning department," she said, dropping a stack of papers on the kitchen table. "They're claiming the ranch violates multiple zoning regulations and environmental codes." The complaint was comprehensive, citing everything from improper waste management to unauthorized business activities. Apparently, giving horseback rides to our grandkids now qualified as a commercial enterprise. "The worst part," Marissa continued, "is that Commissioner Frank Wilson is personally overseeing the inspection. It's scheduled for next Monday." We both understood what this meant. The same Frank Wilson who was receiving payments from the HOA's shell company would now be inspecting our property for violations. While we prepared for the inspection, Emily and Jessica continued their intelligence gathering. The emails they uncovered painted an increasingly disturbing picture of corruption and manipulation. In one exchange between Karen and Frank Wilson, they explicitly discussed handling the ranch problem and ensuring the inspection findings support our community's concerns. Another email from Karen to Richard Hawkins mentioned that once the Reynolds property is acquired, we can proceed with Phase 2 of the development plan. They weren't just trying to inconvenience us or force us to use another access road. They wanted our land, and they were willing to use corrupt officials and fraudulent inspections to get it. The inspection day arrived, and Frank Wilson showed up with 2 junior officials in tow. From the moment he stepped onto our property, his hostility was evident. "Mr. Reynolds," he said with a cold smile, not bothering to offer a handshake, "we've received some concerning reports about this property." For the next 3 hours, Wilson scrutinized every inch of our ranch, making notes and taking photographs, occasionally conferring with his assistants in hushed tones. He cited us for a rusted gutter on the barn, a small oil stain on the ground near our tractor, and the temporary fence we'd erected after a storm damaged the original one last spring. Each supposed violation was minor, even trivial, but Wilson treated each as if it were a major environmental disaster. As the inspection concluded, Wilson handed me a preliminary report listing 12 critical violations that would require immediate remediation. The estimated cost of these repairs and changes would run into the tens of thousands of dollars. "You have 30 days to address these issues," Wilson said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Otherwise, the county will be forced to assess penalties of $500 per day per violation." As he turned to leave, he paused, glancing back at me. "Selling might be your best option, Reynolds," he said quietly, making sure his assistants couldn't hear. "This can all go away if you make the right decision. Otherwise, we'll make your life a living hell." I watched them drive away, my hands clenched into fists, anger and determination coursing through me in equal measure. That evening, Marissa contacted Alex Turner, a reporter for the local newspaper. It was time to start laying the groundwork for our counterattack. "We can't go public with everything yet," she explained to me. "If we show our hand too soon, they'll destroy evidence and close ranks. but we can plant the seeds, get Alex interested in looking into the connection between the shopping center development and the shopping center development. As we sat on our porch, watching the sunset over land that had been in my family for generations, I felt a resolve harden within me. Enough is enough, I told Marissa, my decision made. It's time we fight back their way. Marissa smiled, that calculating smile that had preceded the downfall of many opposing attorneys in her career. So, she said, scrolling through her phone contacts, do you think Alex Turner might be interested in an exclusive story? While Marissa worked on the legal and media angle, I decided to follow up on Jessica's hint about Stephanie Green's discomfort with the HOA's financial dealings. After another HOA meeting that Jessica had informed us about, I waited in the parking lot until I saw Stephanie emerge, walking quickly to her car with her head down. "Miss Green?" I called out, approaching slowly so as not to startle her. "Could I have a word?" She looked up, alarm flashing across her face when she recognized me. I can't talk to you," she said, fumbling with her car keys. Karen isn't here right now," I interrupted gently, "and I think you know what they're doing isn't right." Stephanie hesitated, conflict evident in her expression. After a moment she sighed deeply. 5 minutes, she said. "Not here. Meet me at Westside Coffee Shop in 20 minutes. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived. Stephanie sat in a corner booth, nervously shredding a napkin. As I slid in across from her, she spoke before I could even greet her. "I want you to know I never wanted any part of this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just the bookkeeper. I set up the accounts like they asked me to. I didn't know what the money was for, not at first. But as time went on," she explained, "it became obvious that the Community Enhancement Fund was being used to bribe county officials. Karen has all these shell companies," Stephanie continued. "The money moves from the HOA account to Oak Ridge Community Consulting, then it gets dispersed to other entities before finally reaching the commissioners. It's structured to look like legitimate consulting fees." When I asked why she didn't resign or report it, fear flashed in her eyes. "Karen has dirt on everyone. She made it clear what would happen if I didn't play ball. My cousin was arrested for DUI last year. She has a file of police records that were supposed to be sealed. She would ruin me." Stephanie's hands trembled as she pulled a small notebook from her purse. "These are the account numbers and transaction dates," she whispered, sliding it across the table. "I've been keeping this separate record just in case something like this happened." I quickly leafed through pages of meticulously documented transactions, dates, amounts, account numbers, and cryptic notes about consulting services and community relations. This was exactly the kind of concrete evidence we needed. "Why are you helping us now?" I asked, genuinely curious about what had pushed her to take such a risk. Stephanie looked down at her coffee, silent for a long moment. "My father was a city accountant for 30 years, she finally said. "He taught me that numbers don't lie and they should never be made to. What Karen is doing, what she's making me do, dishonors everything he stood for. I just can't sleep at night anymore." As our meeting concluded, Stephanie made me promise to protect her identity. "Karen can't know it was me. She'd destroy my career, my reputation, everything." Meanwhile, Emily had made contact with Marcus Chen, a county technical officer who was investigating irregularities in the shopping center approval process. Emily, using her university connections, had managed to arrange a meeting under the pretense of discussing internship opportunities in local government. Marcus, it turned out, was one of the few county employees who hadn't been compromised by Karen and her allies. "The whole approval process stinks," he told Emily over coffee at the university cafeteria. "Environmental impact studies rushed through, zoning changes approved without the usual public comment period, permits granted in record time." Marcus had been quietly gathering documentation of these irregularities, but as a technical officer rather than an elected official, his authority was limited. "Commissioner Wilson has been pushing this through like nothing I've ever seen," Marcus added, "and any time I raise concerns, I get shut down or assigned to other projects." Marcus glanced around nervously before pulling out his tablet. "Look at this," he said, opening a folder of documents. "This is the environmental impact assessment for the shopping center. It should have taken months to complete properly, but somehow they finished it in 2 weeks." Emily examined the report, noting the superficial analysis and missing data. "And here," Marcus continued, opening another file, "is the traffic study that's supposed to show the development won't cause congestion. They conducted it on a holiday weekend when half the town was away." He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I've been documenting everything, but I'm just one person against a system. Wilson has friends in every department. Last week, my supervisor suggested I focus on other projects if I want to keep my job." Emily saw an opportunity. What if you had help, she asked. What if there were others who could verify your concerns and support your findings? Marcus looked at her skeptically. Like who? Emily smiled. Like a family, with concrete evidence of bribery tied directly to this development. Back at the ranch, we compiled our growing evidence. Emily had discovered that Karen, through another shell company, had been purchasing additional properties adjacent to the proposed shopping center site, clearly anticipating the surge in value once the project was approved. If the development fell through, the HOA and Karen personally stood to lose millions. James, our son and a newly minted attorney working at a firm in the city, returned home to help us coordinate our legal strategy. This isn't just bribery anymore, Dad, he said, reviewing the documents we'd gathered. It's money laundering, tax fraud, and possibly extortion. We have enough to put half the county board in jail. Our breakthrough came unexpectedly. Stephanie, perhaps driven by a guilty conscience or fear of eventual prosecution, provided us with a complete set of financial records detailing every questionable transaction. The documents revealed that Karen had established a separate fund of $250,000 for undisclosed legal expenses, money that was actually intended for bribes and possibly even more sinister purposes. She calls it her insurance policy, Stephanie explained in a trembling voice during a secret meeting at our attorney's office. It's for taking care of problems that don't respond to normal pressure. The implication was clear and chilling. We now had concrete evidence of corruption, but we still faced the immediate problem of accessing our property. The legal process to force the HOA to restore our easement rights could take months, during which time the financial pressure and harassment could force us to sell. That evening, as our impromptu war council, Marissa, Emily, James, and I, gathered around our kitchen table, Marissa summarized our position. We have the evidence, she said. The question now is, how do we use this bomb to reopen our road? Emily, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, suddenly spoke up. I have an idea, she said, a gleam in her eye that I recognized from her childhood. The same look she'd had right before convincing the school board to change a policy she felt was unfair. What if we don't have to choose between legal action and going public? What if we create a situation where they have to back down immediately or face instant exposure? As she outlined her plan, I felt a smile spreading across my face. It was bold, it was risky, and it might just work. Alex Turner's initial article about our easement dispute appeared in the local newspaper the following week. It was a relatively small piece, mentioning the HOA's gate installation and our legal claim to access, but notably avoiding any mention of the corruption allegations. We weren't ready to reveal that card yet. However, even this modest public exposure was enough to put Karen and the HOA on alert. Their response was swift and aggressive. Within days, the security at the gate was enhanced with surveillance cameras and a more imposing presence. They hired Robert Bob Thompson, a former police officer with a questionable reputation, as their new head of security. His first act was to issue stern warnings to any resident seen speaking with us or expressing sympathy for our situation. The HOA's attorney, a slick operator named Greg Peterson, sent us a cease and desist letter warning against defamatory statements and threatening further legal action if we continued to harass HOA members or trespass on private property. The letter was clearly intended to intimidate us into silence, but it had the opposite effect. It confirmed we had them worried. Jessica called me in a panic one evening, her voice hushed and frightened. They're targeting me, she said. I just got a violation notice for unauthorized landscape modifications. I planted tulips, for God's sake. Karen personally came by to tell me they'd be watching my property closely from now on. She asked if I'd been talking to anyone I shouldn't be. We arranged for Jessica to communicate with us only through a secure email account Emily had set up, hoping to protect her from further intimidation. The letter from Peterson was a masterclass in legal intimidation, filled with vague accusations and thinly veiled threats. Any attempt to disparage the reputation of Oak Ridge Estates or its board members will be met with immediate legal action for damages, it stated. Furthermore, any continued attempts to solicit information from HOA members or employees could constitute harassment under Texas law. Marissa read it with a professional eye, noting the carefully chosen language. This is boilerplate scare tactics, she said, tossing the letter onto the kitchen counter. But it tells us something important. They're nervous. James agreed, pointing out that the letter never actually denied any wrongdoing. It's all about silencing us, not refuting our claims. That's telling. Emily was more direct in her assessment. They're scared, and they should be. Our other allies were facing pressure too. Stephanie withdrew her cooperation, too terrified of Karen's threats to continue helping us. Marcus Chen was suddenly reassigned to a remote project involving county watershed management, effectively removing him from any oversight of the shopping center approval process. Even our attorney reported receiving a friendly call from a colleague at Greg Peterson's firm, suggesting that continuing to represent us might complicate his firm's standing with certain county officials. The HOA was systematically isolating us, cutting off our sources of information and support. It was a well-executed strategy that spoke to Karen's cunning and the depth of her connections. Marcus called Emily from a burner phone, his voice tense with frustration. "They've buried me in paperwork for a project 50 miles from the office," he explained. "They're making sure I can't access any files related to the shopping center, and get this, they've expedited the final approval process. The board vote is now scheduled for next month instead of next quarter." This was alarming news. They were accelerating their timeline, perhaps sensing our investigation. "What about the documentation you collected?" Emily asked. Marcus sighed heavily. "I made copies, but they're watching me like hawks. I can't access my work computer or files without supervision now." Despite these setbacks, he promised to stay in touch and help however he could. "Just be careful," Emily warned. "These people play dirty." One night, I attempted to access our property on foot, using a path that skirted the edge of the Oak Ridge Estate's property line. I had been making this journey 3 times a week to tend to our animals and check on the house, a grueling hike that took nearly an hour each way. As I approached the fence line, a bright spotlight suddenly illuminated the area, and Bob Thompson stepped out from behind a tree. "Even in Reynolds," he said, his hand resting casually on what I was certain was a concealed weapon. "Taking a little stroll?" His tone was conversational, but the threat was unmistakable. "I'm accessing my property," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't Oak Ridge land." Thompson smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "Funny thing about property lines," he said. "They can be so confusing in the dark. Would be a shame if someone mistook you for a trespasser and things got..." The encounter left me shaken. Thompson wasn't just an overzealous security guard. He was a deliberate intimidation tactic, chosen specifically for his capacity to threaten without crossing clear legal lines. I'd later learn that he'd been fired from the Austin Police Department after multiple excessive force complaints, only avoiding charges through the intervention of a well-connected attorney, the same Greg Peterson now representing the HOA. As I continued my difficult journey to the ranch that night, I couldn't help but think about how quickly this dispute had escalated from bureaucratic harassment to physical intimidation. The stakes were clearly higher than we'd initially realized, and the HOA was willing to go to extreme lengths to protect their interests. Before the situation could escalate further, a county sheriff's cruiser pulled up, its lights flashing. Deputy Mike Johnson, my old friend, stepped out. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his hand resting casually on his holster as he assessed the situation. Thompson backed off, claiming he was just having a friendly conversation with a neighbor. After he left, Mike turned to me with a grave expression. "Jack, you need to be careful," he warned. "I've heard things about Thompson. He's not just a security guard. He's got a history. Lost his badge in Austin for excessive force. The situation is getting dangerous." I thanked Mike for the timely intervention, but as I continued my journey to the ranch, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. When I returned home, I found the family gathered in the kitchen, their expressions somber. Emily had discovered that our emails were being monitored. Karen somehow knew about our meetings with Stephanie and had been tracking our communications. James reported that the judge assigned to our easement case had unexpectedly recused himself, citing a conflict of interest, which would delay proceedings by at least another month. The HOA was winning, systematically dismantling our support network and blocking our legal remedies while the shopping center approval date drew closer. "They're running out the clock," Marissa observed, frustration evident in her voice. "If they can hold us off until the development is approved, the property values will skyrocket, and they'll have achieved their goal whether we sell or not." As we sat around the kitchen table that night, the mood was heavier than it had ever been. "They're winning," Emily said quietly, voicing what we all were thinking. Marissa looked at me, and I saw in her eyes not defeat but iron determination. "It's time we stop playing by the rules," she said firmly. "Time to show them what happens when you back a Reynolds family into a corner." I nodded, reaching for her hand. The HOA had resources, connections, and power, but we had something more valuable, truth on our side, and a family that refused to be broken. "Tomorrow," I said, "we start fighting back for real." The next morning, our family convened for what we half-jokingly called our war council. Emily laid out a 3-part plan that would hit the HOA where it hurt most. First, she explained, I've set up a secure server that will store all our evidence about the corruption. It's backed up in multiple locations and set up with a dead man switch. If we don't input a code every 48 hours, everything automatically gets sent to a list of recipients, including state investigators, the FBI, and major news outlets. James nodded approvingly. Second, I've drafted an emergency injunction about the easement rights, but I've also prepared a separate file on the corruption to submit to the state attorney general's office. We don't filed it yet. It's our nuclear option. Marissa then outlined the third part of the plan. Jack and I will approach council member Diane Lewis. She's not implicated in any of the bribes, and she has a reputation for integrity. We show her what we have and ask for her help. Approaching Diane Lewis was risky. If she was secretly allied with Frank Wilson and the others, our plan would be exposed. But our research suggested she was genuinely committed to ethical governance. We met her at a coffee shop 2 towns over, away from prying eyes. At first she was hesitant, clearly uncomfortable with a private meeting that could be seen as inappropriate. But as we began to lay out the evidence, the shell companies, the money trail, the emails explicitly discussing bribes, her expression changed from skepticism to shock. This is bigger than I imagined, she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she examined a particularly damning email exchange between Karen and Frank Wilson. I knew something wasn't right with how quickly that shopping center was being pushed through, but she looked up at us, her decision made. What do you need from me? With Diane's help, we connected with state investigator Brian Foster, a no-nonsense corruption specialist who operated independently of the county power structure. Foster reviewed our evidence and immediately opened an official investigation, carefully keeping it quiet to avoid tipping off Wilson and the other corrupt officials. Meanwhile, Emily put the finishing touches on what she called the HOA Transparency Project, a website ready to go live at a moment's notice, containing all the emails, financial transactions, and evidence of bribery. James filed our emergency injunction regarding the easement rights, ensuring it landed on the docket of Judge Martha Hernandez, a jurist known for her strict interpretation of property law and immunity to political pressure. The day before our scheduled court hearing, Marissa and I requested a meeting with Karen and David Miller. We chose a public location, a busy restaurant where they couldn't make a scene. Karen arrived with her usual air of superiority, David trailing behind with a practiced lawyer's poker face. "This is a waste of time," Karen said as she slid into the booth. "Our position hasn't changed." I smiled calmly and placed a USB drive on the table between us. "Before you say anything else, you should know what's on this," I said. "It's a copy of all the emails between you and Frank Wilson discussing the bribes. It's the financial records showing how the money flowed from your shell companies to county officials. It's the documentation of how you used HOA funds for personal property investments around the proposed shopping center." Karen's face remained impassive, but I noticed David's hand tighten slightly around his water glass. "We're prepared to release all of this to the state attorney general, the press, and the public tomorrow morning, right before our court hearing. Unless," Marissa added, leaning forward, "the gate blocking our easement is removed tonight, and all harassment of our allies ceases immediately." Karen laughed, though I detected a note of strain. "You're bluffing," she said dismissively. "If you had anything real, you'd have used it already." David, however, was studying my face carefully. "What exactly do you want?" he asked, a hint of wariness in his voice. "It's simple," I replied. "Remove the gate tonight. Issue a formal HOA acknowledgement of our easement rights. End the fraudulent code violations against our property and Jessica's. In return, we don't go public with this information." Karen's smile turned cold. "And if we refuse?" Marissa matched her stare. "Then by this time tomorrow, half your board will be under investigation, the shopping center deal will collapse, and those property investments you've made will be worth pennies on the dollar." As we left the restaurant, Karen's parting words echoed behind us. "You don't have the guts to follow through. By tomorrow afternoon, you'll be the ones begging for a deal." The courtroom the next morning was more crowded than expected for what should have been a routine property dispute. Judge Martha Hernandez entered, her expression stern and uncompromising as always. Our attorney began presenting our case for the emergency injunction, methodically outlining the long-established easement rights and the HOA's unlawful interference. The HOA's lawyer, Greg Peterson, seemed unusually confident, occasionally shooting smug glances our way. It wasn't until the courtroom doors opened and Diane Lewis walked in, accompanied by Brian Foster and 2 uniformed state troopers, that Peterson's smile faltered. Judge Hernandez looked up, clearly surprised by the interruption. "Your Honor," Foster said, approaching the bench, "I apologize for the disruption, but I need to submit evidence relevant to this case. We have reason to believe that the defendant's actions regarding the plaintiff's property are part of a larger criminal conspiracy." The courtroom erupted in murmurs as Foster presented Judge Hernandez with a file containing key pieces of our evidence. At the same moment, as if choreographed, the doors opened again and Alex Turner walked in with his editor, both carrying fresh copies of the morning edition. The headline was impossible to miss: County Corruption and Commissioners Implicated in Bribery Scheme. Simultaneously, our phones buzzed with notifications. Emily had activated the HOA Transparency website, making all the evidence publicly accessible. Karen's face, which had been frozen in a mask of disbelief as Foster spoke, now drained of all color as she saw the newspaper. David Miller immediately stood up, requesting a recess to confer with his client, but Judge Hernandez was already flipping through the file Foster had provided, her expression darkening with each page.